food has really been at the heart of my life and kind of my heart since I can really remember. So I look forward to this conversation.
Chris, I've been thinking about, in the restaurant business got hit pretty hard during COVID, right? So we had there really that first line of support where we go to get food made for us. And so that whole thing went through a huge turmoil. What's it like now as we say, AD after disease? Are things settling out?
I think yes and no. I think there's a certain chunk of the at least group of employees that were maybe kind of transient that decided, this isn't for me. I'm just gonna go find something else, which I think is probably a good thing. If your heart's not in it, if you don't love cooking in restaurants and taking care of people, then you're probably in the wrong industry. So I think that's been one of the challenges with hiring. But yeah, I think things are coming back along. We'll see with the way things are going with the economy these days, but fingers crossed.
One of the things that happened here in Santa Barbara was they call them parklets, but it's building a dining area outside the restaurant. Either, in our case, they closed the main street and we have a lot of these parklets. And some of these places have tripled their seating and they're not anxious to have those go away. Is that the same kind of thing where you are?
Yeah, actually, when I had my restaurant, I sold my share maybe 4 or 5 years ago. We had a parklet right in front of us, which was great because we had maybe 70 seats inside, but we had a couple tables outside, but not really a patio per se. So it was great. And it brings a nice energy, and I think that's the important part and the kind of fun part about it is it's something different. You have most downtown areas don't utilize the parking spaces all the time. So let's find an interesting way to make them more of a kind of vibrant part of the community.
You talk about energy, and I agree wholeheartedly with that. The thing I want to focus on today is the energy around the dining room table and how it feels like our lives have gotten so busy that we hadn't been eating together. And I think because of COVID caused everybody to be locked down, we were forced to eat together. But let's kind of go back to think of before COVID when we really were too busy to sit down and share a meal. I think we lost something. Do you have a point of view on that?
I do. I think you can even kind of take it a little bit further back. Let's maybe even let's say, so before the Industrial Revolution, families were just with each other all the time, right? Like they were working on the farm together, and then they'd have breakfast and dinner together, and then the Industrial Revolution comes along. You have the men going off to work, you have women taking care of the houses, kids going off to school, and then that kind of led to where we kind of were throughout the 20th century, and then which wasn't great, right? And then you had women starting to work more, and that really led to a like the microwave dinners and things like that. And it's I think we're at a place where people are excited to get back to kind of the roots, especially with the farm to table movements and more connection to the food and hopefully each other, because you and I were talking before about how there's a lot of great research showing that not only is it good for you, but it's good for the kids and the whole family and well-being and mental health and all that kind of stuff. So it's one of those things we all love, right? Everybody loves food. Everybody agrees on a good meal. Maybe you like it spicy, maybe you don't. But at the end of the day, it's hard to argue over a good meal.
Let's add another layer of complication to our conversation, which is the everybody looking at this instead of one another, even at the dining room table at home. Or I can't tell you how many restaurants, even if you just look out over the dining room, half the people are staring at their phone and not talking to one another.
Some of the research I came across and kind of dissecting some of these ideas was that it's great to eat as a family, but only really matters if you have the TV off, where you're actually paying attention to each other and you're connecting. And so, there's a lot of things people do. Sometimes I've heard where if say you got with your friends, everybody throws your phone in the middle of the table. Whoever grabs their phone first, pays for the meal. Fun things like that. Obviously, you have maybe a little more controlled environment at home, but I think it's a way to connect. Unlike a lot of maybe the last couple generations, of latchkey kids and parents running around didn't really get a chance to do.
I know, my kids they have grandkids for me now. So that's been a long time since they were in high school. But back then they were the only kids in each of their class that had regular dinner at the table. And I don't know if it was because I'm a chef at heart, and I've been a chef my whole life. If it's that I just have more importance around food and enjoying food and not just taking it for granted. I'm not sure. So I want to talk about the writing you've done. You've done a lot of writing to chefs, talking about what's it like to be a chef, and to people who want to be a chef. And it's spot on. You call out all the exact things that are going. It's not an easy life. It's very, very tough, and it's also very, very satisfying, and it's very rewarding if you're at all creative to walk into the kitchen in the morning and flip on the lights and there's nothing, and a couple of hours later there's something magnificent. There's a joy and an immediacy to that I'll never get used to. It's just always bubbling in me. What if you were to write a letter that is similar to parents, extolling them around the virtues of cooking at home? And a lot of them, they kind of toss it off this, well, I don't cook. I don't have to cook. I don't, we order in or whatever. What kind of letter would that be like, Chris?
Well, and as you said, ordering in, that's one of the things COVID did as well, is a lot more folks are picking up food to go, which is so silly because everybody had so much more time being at home, right? But I think I keep going back to this whole idea of the connection, not only to each other but also the ingredients. So I'm a big fan of. I grew up in our backyard, down south in Atlanta. Hot summers, we had tomato vines and other vegetables that if you have kids, like, that's a great way to connect them to the food. Like they can help grow them, and then, hey, why don't you go grab some tomatoes that we can slice up for your salad? I promise you the tomato is going to taste a lot better when they feel like they have some ownership over it. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is, like, Mark, as well as I, like, not most dishes when you're first kind of trying things out, like, don't really work out. And that's okay. I think part of it is just the thought and the care that goes into doing something nice for somebody. And they feel better because you did something nice for them. You feel better because you did something for them. And everybody wins.
One thing I'm reminded of when you talk about sending the kids out to get tomatoes, there's a pretty famous TED talk by Ron Finley, urban gardener in Los Angeles. And what he did was he commandeered the space between the end of the house and the street, that strip of brown dirt that runs through industrial areas and all over the city. And he commandeered them into gardens. And he said, kids who grow kale will eat kale, which is pretty true, right? And the other thing I'm reminded of when you talk about that selfless act of cooking for someone else, it reminds us what industry this is. It's a hospitality industry, right? We kind of forget that part of it, and that nurturing and caring, and that there's huge benefits for that. And we look at the kind of relationships we have and how right now things are so supercharged because of all the various reasons: the stock market, the jobs, the COVID, everything. That an easy way to bring back a great feeling is, to your point, just a simple meal served humbly.
Yeah, unless it's Thanksgiving dinner with the crazy uncle around. But you're right, and that James Beard has a quote that I love that's kind of been one of the foundations for the way I look at food food is our common ground, a universal experience. Everywhere across the world, people are eating, right? And when you look at the different cuisines of the world, here in the U.S. South, we have a gumbo. All right. Well, in France, they have a bouillabaisse. They have cioppino in Italy. And you can go across the world and see there's these very similar ideas of cooking and food and the way things came about, but it's just unique slightly to where it comes from. And that's what's really neat. Like, once you learn a number, and this kind of goes back to maybe the letter I would write to home cooks, is once you learn a very minimal, and you and I could probably give a number of different techniques, but once you learn a few techniques, you can do a lot of different things, and you can start using the recipe as kind of a guideline and kind of spin off from it versus having to follow it to T.
What's the youngest kid you've had in your kitchen that wanted to learn how to cook?
I've had some high school, I'd say high school kids, like late high school going into their transition out. They were trying to figure out the kind of the next path. Which I encourage anybody that wants to go to culinary school to work in a restaurant at least for a year or so and see if you actually like it. If you love it after a year, then go to culinary school. But that's another thing too, is a lot of us growing up didn't, because our parents were maybe both working, didn't necessarily learn a lot of the cooking techniques from our parents.
Right. I think there's at least 2 generations where that's true, right? Where they haven't learned how to, they weren't, unless maybe the stories I've heard where they were raised by their grandparents, right? Mom and dad were at work, and so grandma raised them. And so, grandma did all the cooking, and that, that worked. And then you have the other part, I think, is the connection, not only to the food and one another, but it's connection to legacy and connection to family roots, and to your point of a bouillabaisse that has been passed down from 7 generations, and it's on an old card that's all stained. It's like that's the family treasure, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because it's always grandma's recipe, or it's never mom's. It's always a few generations back. And like we've had, for our family, every Christmas Eve we do a lobster dinner, and it's been going for at least, I think, 3 generations. When you're 12 years old, you don't really appreciate lobster the way you do when you're 30. But lobster is great. I love lobster, but it's really about the experience. It's like having everybody together. We pull out a bunch of fish nets on the table and shells. It's the whole thing, and the lobster can be overcooked, but it's the experience, having everybody
kind
together
of doesn't
around the
matter,
table.
does it?
Yeah,
I'm reminded of the Feast of 7 Fishes, which goes back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, on Christmas Eve, right? So as an Italian tradition, my son takes the family up there, Northern California, and they go out to the coast and they get rock crabs and do the same kind of thing. And I think people that are listening right now can think about family traditions that they have that are so important. And I think, as I'm thinking of young couples right now that may not have those traditions, you can start a tradition too, right? You don't have to, well, we don't have one. Well, okay, we'll start one, right? Find a tradition.
Yeah. What was the first meal you had together? There's a number of different ways to spin it. One of the things that you made me think of also was when I wrote my first book, Making the Cut. Frank Stitt, great chef out of Birmingham, James Beard, Hall of Fame. I was talking with him and wrote about him, and he was saying one of the things he would always do with his staff is take them out in the field, and they'd go pick watercress, and they'd go meet the duck farmers, and again being able to connect with ingredients on an entirely different level. Because I can tell you, I'm guilty of just buying a 10-pound bag of chicken breasts that are already sliced and easy to kind of throw on the grill, versus most restaurants don't see a full bird. So that's one of those things too, is it's been a lot more maybe almost commoditized versus seeing it in its traditional form.
Jamie Oliver gave a TED talk in
Mhm.
Long Beach, and he talked about his project of educating kids about food. And he had some clips during his talk that were fantastic, but there were more than one kid who thought that food just arrives or is grown in little
Mhm.
foam packages. You're like, oh, you mean it actually comes out of the ground? And when you see that stark disconnect for kids between, you know, that thing that nourishes us, that's so important to us, be disconnected with what it really means and where it comes from, all of that, it feels like there's a lot of opportunity for guys like you to go out there and educate people.
Yeah, and I think that's where, you know, you see all these little libraries, you know, showing up in different neighborhoods where you can go grab, you know, a book, and
We
I
have one
think it's
right up the street.
that, oh, cool, very cool, yeah. But you could take that whole idea with gardening. I know there are communal gardens, but having just little plots of land where, because I mean, most of us, so you're in California, but most of us here on the East Coast, we grew up eating tomatoes that were picked off the vine 2 weeks ago that had been chilled and waxed and more, you know, properly ripened. And because of that, you just don't appreciate it. Tastes like a little bit of like tomato water almost. I mean, it's not, but then you take it out of the backyard garden and it's like, wow, this is really good. It tastes almost like a peach or an apple or something like that. So um, getting back to those things, farmers markets have been huge. You know, I mean, take your kids to the farmers market on the weekends. I always tell cooks, like, if you get in a rut, go to the farmers market, find a couple ingredients that you've never worked with before, and just have fun and play around. So take your kids to the farmers market and tell them, hey, look, why don't we grab two vegetables we haven't, you know, ever cooked with before, and we'll figure out something fun to do with them.
Chris, I bet you'd be a blast to go to the farmers market with. Thanks for spending some time with us.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Mark.